where we left off the week before, of course, was the opening of Genesis 19 and the judgment of Sodom and Gomorrah. And we left off here and kind of conclude here with this 8 verses that cover the aftermath of that judgment and the life of Lot and his daughters. And I have to tell you, I kind of looked at this earlier in the week, and I was telling one of the guys, I feel like I painted myself in a corner to do a message on these 8 verses. I have to tell you, if we weren't committed to teaching verse by verse, we just kind of skip this part, because it's just a horrible thing to read about. But at the same time, it's a passage that's got, tremendous relevance for our day. And there's a tremendous warning here. Here's the warning. Here's a guy who is a dad and a husband. And in one generation, he's a believer. And in one generation, he loses everything in terms of his family, spiritually. I mean, his daughters are completely sold out to the culture of Sodom. They get drug out by the grace of God, by the angels. And his wife, because of her stuff and wanting to just continue to look back to the city and view it. And remember, we talked about it wasn't like a quick glance and God said, "Oh, I got you." I mean, she turns and looks back and refuses to continue with them to this little town of Zoar, which may have taken them a couple of hours to get there. And the angel said, "Judgment will not come until you've reached the city." So this is not a quick glance. I mean, she just refused to go on and turned and said, "My stuff and what my life is about in that city is more important than my family, more important than my relationship with the Lord. It's more important than anything. If I need to turn and look and long for this stuff, if I need to die, I'll die." That's called materialism to the max. That's his wife. Here's a guy that lost it all in one generation. I quoted from this book just because it's got a fun title. You're going to really enjoy this title. It's by Robert Gundry, a noted theologian. Dr. Gundry wrote a book in 2001 that deals with this issue of the concern of the church absorbing, again, the values of the culture around us, which is so much of what this message is about. You may have heard of this book. It's called Jesus the Word, according to John the Sectarian, a paleo-fundamentalist manifesto for contemporary evangelicalism, especially its elites in North America. Did you pick that one up? Probably not. Very long title. I'm sure the publishers were thrilled with the title. But this is what he says. The seeker sensitivity of evangelicals. This is a current phenomena going on for the last 30 years in churches in North America. Their practice of suiting the gospel to the felt needs of people, primarily the bourgeois, contributes to their numerical success, but can easily sow the seeds of worldliness broadly conceived. How so? Well, in a society such as ours, where people do not feel particularly guilty before God, though in fact they are, seeker sensitivity, if consistently carried through, will soft pedal the preaching of salvation from sin. For such preaching would not meet a felt need of people. As a result, the gospel message of saving, sanctifying grace reduces to a gospel massage of physical, psychological, and social well-being that allows worldliness to flourish. It's happening in our world today because of some church growth movements, theological changes that are going on, and the constant influence of the world around us. And at least Dr. Gundry here is trying to warn us. Now, when we talk about Lot, and we made reference a couple of times to 2 Peter, where Peter 3 times calls Lot a righteous man. And we've made reference to the fact that if he didn't say that, we wouldn't believe it because of the man's actions, where he was living, what he was doing, things he said, things that we could observe about him. Ken Hughes puts it this way: ironically, though Lot was revolted by Sodom, Sodom was in his soul. It's possible then to be distressed by the world while hanging on to it for dear life. Pray that would not be said of any of us. Remember, the 2 Peter passage says he was vexed and tormented in his soul daily because of what he saw and what was going on in Sodom. But he hung on to it for dear life. I mean, he could have left it any time. He could have said something about it to his kids, to his wife. but apparently never did. Well, I want to read verse 1 as well as verse 30 as we look at the continual influence of Sodom over his life. Verse 1, remember from a few weeks ago, says, "Now the two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face towards the ground." So we'll make note of that in a moment, that he is deeply entrenched in the city, in the culture. In the gate means he's on the city council. He has a ruling position, a place of prominence in the city. Verse 30, "Then Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the mountains, and his two daughters were with him, for he was afraid to dwell in Zoar, and he and his two daughters dwelt in a cave." So another movement, but continual influence over Lot all the way back to his time with Abraham. Now remember, this all comes up because as God calls Abraham out of Ur of the Chaldeans, he ends up taking Lot with him. There's a point in time when they're in the land. Abraham is building his altars. He's worshiping the Lord. He's calling on the Lord. God's revealing himself to him. He's promising in his covenant relationship with Abraham the land, the seed, and an heir, and so forth. Lot is part of all of that. But in a moment of weakness in the life of Abraham, he ends up in a time of drought. Remember, going to Egypt. God wanted them in the land, in a mountainous area where they would be absolutely dependent upon God to bring rain. He could have planted the children of Israel in Egypt and given them that land with the Nile, and they could have irrigated like the Egyptians and always had plenty, and they were, again, supplying so much of the nutrients to the world at that time. Egypt was. It was easy. It was no problem. God doesn't plant them there. He plants them in Israel, where they have to live in dependence upon God all the time. He puts us there sometimes as well, doesn't he? Not so much the life of ease. He likes it when we're in that place where we have to look to him. We have to trust him, or we're not going to get through the day. That's usually when we're walking the closest with him. Abraham, though, checks out on that, doesn't trust God, doesn't believe God, and he basically goes to Egypt. And remember, he goes in, all right, he says it works up this whole deal that his beautiful wife Sarah is really his sister and so forth, and they have the whole fiasco. They make it out of there by the grace of God, come back into the land. Then later, shortly after that, because God is blessing and the herds and the flocks are growing so greatly between these two men, there's quarreling, there's fighting. Abraham says to Lot, hey, you go to the left, I'll go to the right, and so forth. This is back in Genesis 13. But notice the reference to Egypt as he makes his decision in Genesis 13:10. "And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt as you go toward Zoar. Then Lot chose for himself all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed eastward, and they separated from each other." Lot looks and says, I've got to decide, and he got a taste of the world in Egypt. And when he looks at Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities of the plains, he says, it reminds me of Egypt, and I kind of like that. So I'm going to choose that way. Moses, the writer, so writing so carefully, as we've pointed out many times, says that Lot journeyed east, journeyed away from God. The journey to God all along with Abraham is west. They're going west. They're leaving Babylon behind. They're leaving Ur behind. They're leaving the idolatry behind. And they're going where God is leading them. Lot's now going the opposite direction, as pointed out here by Moses. And that's how it all begins. The slide downward, the effect of Sodom was continual. Next, he's living in Sodom. That's in chapter 14. And finally, we read in verse 1 of chapter 19, he's at the gate. He's a prominent person in that city. Now, we could read these chapters, and it just seems like, man, that was like, well, yeah, this took some time. His move in this direction, the influence was probably not that notable to him at the time. And I'm sure easily justifiable in his own mind. Next, we want to say about the continuing influence. It was seen when the angels arrived. Remember, they show up. He's in his home. They're in his home as a guest. And remember, they're beating on the door, crying, bring them out, and so forth. We noted that it was all the men of the city. which meant that all the men in that city, in Sodom, were either homosexual or bisexual. They were all there, all at the door, violently. Previously, Bible had talked about the fact that it was the cry of Sodom that went up to God. That cry and that phrase made reference to the fact there was tremendous oppression of basic human rights in that city, a violent city. It was all of these things for all these reasons that God was going to judge it. What was Lot's great idea for saving the day? He says, I'll send my 2 daughters out who are virgins. They've never known a man. You can do with them as you wish. Nice, Dad. Way to go there. Of course, the angels intervene. But when we say there is a continual influence over the thinking and the behavior of Lot, though according to 2 Peter, a righteous man, it's getting worse, isn't it? And then we noted that the third thing about the continual influence is his distrust of God and God's protection. We see that in verse 30 again. Then Lot went up out of Zoar, dwelt in the mountains with his 2 daughters there with him. He was afraid to dwell in Zoar. Now remember when the angels, and we called them angels of mercy, because they grabbed Lot by the hand, they grabbed his wife by the hand, the other one grabbed one daughter, the other one grabbed the other daughter, and they literally pulled them out of that city that night before judgment would come. They're on their way out, and the angels are taking him to the mountains, and he says, I don't think I can make it to the mountains. How about taking me to that little city over there? Zoar means little city. Take me to that little city. It was a little version of Sodom. He says, took a little nerve. Take me to that city over there. Will you take me over there? And the angel says, yes, we will. We'll take you over there, and judgment will not fall until you have reached it. So they're there. God has allowed him to go there. And now he's afraid to be in the city. It's kind of interesting. Why would he be afraid to be there? Is he looking around, seeing the same thing he saw before where God brought judgment? He has to start wondering, is God going to bring another judgment? Am I even safe here? Why doesn't he go back to Abraham at that point? I mean, he's lost everything, right? Everything he's got is toast. He doesn't have a dime in his pocket, or I should say a shekel in his pocket. He has nothing. Would Abraham take him back? Absolutely. Everything we know about Abraham, he's like the most gracious guy in the world. He's afraid, but he doesn't go there. He goes up to a mountain and goes in a cave, and basically is driven by his fears. I love this line by Donald Barnhouse. He says, when a man is out of the will of God, he's haunted by the boogies of his own imagination. That's the what ifs. Well, what if this happens? And if that happens, this might happen. And if that happens, this might happen. This is a guy out of the will of God, living in a cloud of fearing judgment, probably living in a tremendous amount of conviction and depression. And this cave is certainly a physical cave, but man, it's a metaphor as well. He's running into darkness and further darkness, which is going to lead to more and more isolation, more and more sin. And the one thing that caves were noted for in that day, we'll talk about a second use here in a moment, but one that they were used for is a tomb. It's where people were buried, and that's where he's going. I mean, in terms of death spiritually entombed. It didn't happen overnight, though. It just took a little compromise. Hey, Abraham says, you choose where you would want to go. Well, you know, that looks nice down there. It starts so subtly. Certainly that's the lesson for us. The writer of Hebrews lays out several warnings to a little group of believers very early on in the history of the church, living probably in southern Judah, and obviously Jewish recipients in that part of the church. And the writer there is writing to them, and one of his warnings very early on in chapter 2 is what we call the danger of drifting. He says, therefore, we must give the more earnest heed to the things we've heard, lest we drift away. And the thing about this warning here is that drifting, well, I can just tell you, it gets a lot of people. It's not to just suddenly do something radical, crazy against God. It's what trips most believers up is just a slow, unintentional, and it's a term of a boat being anchored. And when the guy throws his anchor in and he's there, he expects to be there. The drifting is not intentional. It's not in purpose. He doesn't want to see it happen. He's just not paying attention, and it happens. And we're kind of a ocean culture here, and probably maybe we relate to this maybe more than some of the other things. But I can just tell you where I surf a lot now out at White Plains, that when the trades are blowing, they're not offshore or onshore. They blow straight down. And what's amazing is that when you're setting in the lineup, everybody's drifting at the same pace. You think you're okay, and then you look in and check where the lifeguard stand is. And, oh, wow, I'm way out of the lineup. And then you're just hammering against the wind to get back up there again. But when you're sitting with everybody, everybody's drifting at the same pace. It's not on purpose. It's unintentional. You don't even notice it. And certainly for the Christian, the problem is not the anchor, because the anchor is Jesus Christ. He's not moving away from us. Often we're moving away from him. I want to give you what I came up with years ago, the ABCs of spiritual drifting. When it happens A with age. It's not a brand new believer that this happens to. Brand new believers are excited, man. Jesus forgave them their sins. All the junk in their life they've been able to leave at the foot of the cross. And man, they all of a sudden realize that the Bible can speak to their hearts, and they've come alive, and it's not going to happen to them. It's to the person that's been walking with the Lord, typically for several years. It's the busyness is the B. And there's a price to be paid for busyness, for not taking the time to spend time with the Lord. And we all get very busy. And responsibility can be overwhelming at times. And it's a real danger for us. And the C is for confidence. We become so familiar with the things of God that we just take it all for granted. There's no excitement anymore. We had our speakers here from the mainland for the prophecy conference, and Dr. Heinsohn, Dr. Hawking, and David Seifert all needed to head back right away on Monday. But Don Perkins and his wife, Marie, stayed on for a couple more days. First time in Hawaii. They were excited. So we knew they were going to be around, so Kathy and I said, hey, let us take you out to dinner on Monday, if you would like, and we'll show you the beautiful side of Oahu. We'll show you what Hawaii really looks like, And they're like, oh, we'd love that, and everything. That'd be awesome. And it was great. It was classic. He calls me. He's doing a GPS thing. He's from San Diego. And I guess the GPS takes you over H3 for whatever reason. That's probably a good thing. And so they're coming over H3. And he's got his little Bluetooth on, and he calls me. This is awesome. I can't believe it. These are the most beautiful mountains I've ever seen. This is Hawaii. I'm seeing it. No, he's a pretty excited guy, and he's real excited, looking out and everything. And then they get on down into KAILUA. We're going to take them to Buzz's. And, it was kind of still later in the day. It was like 4:30 or whatever, but still enough light. And then he gets out of the car and, brother, that's what an ocean's supposed to look like. Aqua blue. That's an ocean. That's Hawaii right there, I was getting pumped. We had dinner, and then we took him to Lanikai, went down one of the right-of-ways so we could get, if you looked at Facebook, I put up a couple of pictures of them with the Twin Islands in the background and stuff, and they were just ecstatic. We just had a great time. The guy is just such a humble man. It was just a pleasure to be around him and his wife. But, they're saying all this stuff, and we're going, yeah, that's right. It is awesome. It is beautiful. It is incredible. But we can become so complacent, when you live here for a number of years, or have born and raised here. You kind of can take it all for granted. And we can do the same things with the spiritual things of God as well. A prayer meeting, a Bible study, God speaking to us, memorizing a little verse, put it in a little card, carrying it around our pocket. Jesus says to one of the churches there in Revelation, remember the height from which you've fallen. Do the things you did at first. Repent and go do those things you did as a young believer. And we need to be very, very careful. This is this study here, I hope, will scare the Sodom out of us, in terms of where we're at maybe with the Lord. For him, again, Lot, it was a continual influence. I mean, it starts out little and it's growing and growing. It goes into a dark cave where he's at spiritually in the end. But the influence over his daughters, well, it was just complete. Look at verse 31 and 32. Now the firstborn said to the younger, our father is old, and there is no man on the earth to come into us, as is the custom of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we'll lie with him, that we may preserve the lineage of our father. So we note for them, Sodom's influence is complete, and we see that in the plan. They cook up this whole deal. And by the way, incest was wrong in about every culture there was at that time in the ancient world. In the Hebrew world, in Leviticus, it's the death penalty, completely forbidden. The Mesopotamia culture that Abraham came out of Ur the Chaldeans, we have one of the perhaps oldest legal documents of the ancient world, the Code of Hammurabi, forbidden as well. Again, often facing the death penalties. We have information that the Hittites there in Canaan forbade such sins, again, punishing by death or by banishment. This thing, it wasn't like this was accepted culturally or something. It wasn't, unless maybe you're from Sodom. And obviously these gals knew that it was wrong because of the plan. Let's get our father drunk so he doesn't know what he's doing, so we can pull this off. They think it's okay. They don't have to do that, right? But they have to devise a plan. We see that Sodom's influence over them is complete because the absence of any moral conviction. They knew that it was wrong. They knew that they had to get their father drunk to possibly do this. And the fact that they were willing to do it anyway. They sinned by plan. It was completely intentional on their part. For him, Sodom's influence was continual and it was growing. For them, it was complete. They grew up in it. They accepted it. It was the normal worldview for them. And again, this happens in one generation. I mean, lots of guys that's walking with Abraham, the father of the faith. What an influence and what a life he must have had with Abraham. He has a family in one generation. It's all gone. Let's look for third at the culmination of the sinful act. That's in verse 30 to 35. So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. It happened on the next day that the firstborn said to the younger, indeed, I lay with my father last night. Let us make him drink wine tonight also, and you go in and lie with him, that we may preserve the lineage of our father. Then they made their father drink wine that night also, and the younger arose and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. So we'd say that this influence culminates in the dark, again in the cave at night. Evident that life's choices for Lot were he just could have never imagined. I can just tell you, there's a lot of dads that I've seen make very bad choices in their own lives, and they never imagined what it would do to their kids. This is the warning here. Jesus said it's the little foxes that spoil the vineyards. It's the little compromises that lead to other things that lead to other things. And what it does in the life of the next generation, well, in this case, it's just horrible. His wife wouldn't leave the plains of Sodom because of her stuff. And Jesus tells us in Luke 17 to remember Lot's wife, that we don't get caught up in the same kind of materialism. But again, how did the daughters come up with this idea? They saw it repeatedly demonstrated in their daily lives. It's what they watched. It's what they watched all the time around them. They understood this concept that wine, drinking, drunkenness, sexuality. We can string this together. It wasn't like, I wonder how we could do this. You know, and they knew exactly what they were doing. They knew exactly how to do it as well, because it's what they watched and were influenced by on a regular basis. Notice there had to be deception. involved. They're not telling him ahead of time, we're going to deceive him. And here was, again, this all falls at the feet of Lot. Remember, again, the 2 Peter 2, 7 and 8 says that he was distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked and was tormenting his righteous soul over their lawless deeds. But outwardly, he said nothing. Outwardly, he becomes prominent in the city. He'd master the craft of turning a blind eye to any kind of immorality that was around him and a deaf ear to whatever was said and whatever was going on. So much that he could rise to prominence in this whole situation. He didn't join in with them. He didn't approve of them, but he never said a word either. And we're living in those days, aren't we? You can't say anything against people's sexual conduct. Who are you to be judging me, they would say, whether it's adultery, fornication, or homosexuality. Who are you to judge us? And of course, in the day of gay rights and gay activists, well, that small, less than 3% of the population has a very loud voice, and they're very intimidating. And they would say, how dare you say anything to us? We'll come after you. We'll get you. We'll boycott you, your products, and anything that we can to get back at you. Unfortunately, those are the days that we're living in. Articles from just a few days ago from Chuck Colson on his series of Breakline reports talks about the fact that, there's online shopping. Most of you probably don't know anything about it, but you can actually buy products online. I do a little bit. I've never done this. There's portals where you can go to. This one he makes reference to CGBG. I'm sure the C is for Christian or whatever, but you can go to that portal and then through them buy products from Walmart and Microsoft and a bunch of other people. And then you can designate a portion of those profits going to a nonprofit organization like Family Research Council or Focus on the Family. So you can kind of help the nonprofits while you're shopping. Does that sound good, gals? You're just helping the Lord's work buying those new shoes. So you could really get into this. So this is going on. But Colson writes about it. He says there's a problem, though. Actually, and this has been in the news a little bit. He says among the charities that CGBG shares its profits with are the Family Research Council and Focus on the Family. In July, a petition asking Microsoft to stop doing business with CGBG hit the web. The organizer, Stuart Wilbur, a 73-year-old gay man in Seattle, in the words of the New York Times, says that he was astonished that people could buy Microsoft products through CGBG. Do I have to tell you why he was astonished? After all, many gay activists and organizations consider Focus on the Family and the Family Research Council to be anti-gay hate groups just because they're opposed to so-called gay marriage and consider the biblical teaching that homosexual sex is sinful. It didn't matter that Focus on the Family or FRC were only 2 of thousands of potential recipients, nor did it matter what good the other groups did. Focus and FRC spoke a discouraging word about the homosexuality, so CGBG was beyond the pale. Microsoft gave in, as did Macy's, others like Delta, Target, Walmart, and he talks about it. They pulled their products from being able to be sold because, after all, they were associated with somebody that said something against the norm of what's going on sexually. They weren't being very good lots in doing this at all. Now, fortunately, some of these companies then realized that they were about to lose tens of thousands of customers around the country, Christians in particular, by doing this. And so many of them placed their products right back on that website once again. The spokesman for Delta said, "We thought we were just flying airplanes." There's more to it in this day. Who you're associated with, what they might say. It's interesting, and I could go on and on with examples like this. It's unfortunate. But the goal of the homosexual activists is to get everybody to be a lot, basically, to not say anything. You might disagree, you might not be involved, but you're not allowed to speak out. You're not allowed to say anything. In February 2009, here in Hawaii, many of you were there, we had the largest political rally in the history of the state at the state capitol on that Sunday afternoon in support of traditional marriage. Wasn't reported that way. They said we had a pretty good crowd. Nobody said about the thousands and thousands and the record-setting crowds or anything. I don't think they're allowed to say that in the media here, but yet we did. And what I want to say is that, did anyone see Lot down there? Nope. No Lots in the crowd that day. He would never show up for something like that. Might rattle the boat. He would never hold his prominent position any longer. Here's a guy that's compromised, that won't speak out, that won't stand for the truth of God's word. And he's okay. I mean, the angels of grace come and get him and pull him away from that judgment. But it's horrific how his life ends and what it does to his family. The other influence that culminates here is certainly committing this great sin. In a way, it's been said that the dishonor of him was brilliant when you consider the irony of it. Lot, of course, is saying at one point in time in his home to those that are outside, don't beat my door down. I'll send my daughters out to you so that you can have a sexual relationship with them. He ends up doing what he was concerned the other men might do. There is an irony in it. You think those daughters felt a little bit betrayed under those circumstances? And now they find themselves in this cave with this incredible plan. The other influence here culminates in his own drunkenness. And Lot is drunk. That still makes him culpable. When it reads that he didn't know when he got up, it doesn't mean he's unconscious. It just means he's really drunk, is the idea. Alcohol was no excuse. His drunkenness simply facilitated what was already in the dark side of his own heart. Interesting, someone might ask, where did the alcohol come from, where the wine come from? That was the other use of caves in those days, not just as tombs, but archaeologists have told us today that those communities of the plains cities stored their wine reserves in those caves. Again, there was no idea of pasteurization. Louis Pasteur's work as a chemist was not supported by milk companies. It was supported by the beer and the wine companies, because again, they can make the alcoholic process begin, but they couldn't control it, and of course it would go bad and just completely degenerate. In the ancient world, they had to take wine and try to put it in the cisterns in the cold water or in caves to try to prevent that was happening. So there was ample amount of wine and wine that had been there for a while and had fermented greatly that was available to them. And again, and we've addressed this issue with Noah, but it's amazing when there's these two judgments in the Bible in this period of time. The judgment of the flood, the judgment of Sodom and Gomorrah. Both stories are followed by men getting drunk and doing things of a sexual nature that they never thought in their wildest dreams would happen. It's a very interesting parallel. One writer says, here's the greatest lesson of those things. At the conclusion of the two-storied narratives of divine judgment, one the primeval flood, the other the patriarchal judgment and the destruction of Sodom, those who had been spared God's wrath, Noah and Lot, succumbed to sins similar to those who died in the judgment. Are these guys saved by grace or what? I mean, it's just, the people that tell me there's not grace in the Old Testament, I'm not sure if they're reading the same Bible I'm reading. I'm amazed. I'm amazed at God's grace. They end up, the very thing that God spares them from because he was judging, they end up, to some degree, involved in a very similar sin. It's incredible. Again, Sodom's influence was continual and very pervasive over Lot. Kept getting worse and worse. The daughters, it was just complete. No moral convictions. They had lost it all in one generation. Culminates in one particular sinful act. And notice that influence then is carried into a future generation. In verse 36 and 38. Thus both the daughters of Lot were with child by their father. The firstborn bore a son and called his name Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. And the younger, she also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ami. He is the father of the people of Ammon to this day. So Sodom's influence is carried out through the naming of the kids. Moab in the Hebrew means from my father. Hey, great name for the kid. I'm sure he was probably real thrilled with that growing up. And then they take that name, the Ammonites, and they make her a hero because she was able to preserve the lineage of her father. And so the people then are called the Ammonites. And so this whole influence is carried right in through naming of the child and to the people group themselves. Ben Ami means son of my paternal kinsman. Close, but certainly brings the same idea to mind. And of course, then they do the same thing, and they are known as the Ammonites. It's carried in, we would say, also in terms of future generations that become the enemy of God. And the Moabites and the Ammonites didn't start out as the enemy of God's people. Israel had no beef with them. They understood the lineage that they are from Lot, who was Abraham's cousin, and so forth. So even as they're being led by Moses out of Egypt, up through the Sinai Peninsula, and then up into what would be the Promised Land, the land of Canaan that God would give them, that would be called Israel. As they get to the Moabites and the Ammonites, they're just going to skirt around them. They're just going to go around them. They have no beef with them. God doesn't tell them, these are the guys who want you to judge or anything. They're just trying to go around them. But one of their kings at that time, and you may recall the story now, the king named Balak is looking down upon the millions of Jews that are down below him, and he's threatened by them. So he calls a prophet he knows named Balaam and says, will you come over here and I'll pay you X amount of dollars and you put a curse on these people. You're a prophet, do it. I'll give you any amount of money. And the ante keeps going up, and finally, you know the story. Balaam comes over, and then when he speaks, all he can do is bless them. And he's like, that's not what I'm paying you for. He goes, I can only say what God puts in my heart. I'm a prophet. I can only speak God's word, and God tells me to bless the people. This goes on for a little bit. He's about ready to be on the prophet unemployment line when he says, I got another idea. God's going to continue to bless the people, but he won't bless them if they turn away from him. And you can get them to do that by sending the Moabite gals among them who will say, come worship my idol with me, which involves, a sexual relationship. If you can get them to commit have a sexual relationship with the Moabite gals, then God will judge them. So here we are again with this whole thing going on, and the influence of Sodom, and trying to use it again to bring judgment upon God's people in this way. It gets carried, this whole influence, into the next generation. It's very interesting. The influence is carried in the future generation, but notice that it's also redeemed. We continue on in the Bible, and we finally reach the point where during the time of Judges, when things are not well in Israel, you've got a guy that leaves because of another drought and journeys to the land of the Moabites, where his two sons, get married to Moabite gals, one of them named Ruth. The two sons die, the husband died, and now Naomi, the mom, is going to come back to Israel. And one of the daughters-in-law says, well, I'll stay here with my kinsmen and so forth. And then we have this wonderful line from Ruth, your people are my people, and where you go, I will go, and so forth. Ruth chapter 4. She comes back. She happens to be in the field of her kinsman redeemer of her mother, Boaz. Again, they're married. They have a child, and they end up in the direct lineage of King David. And in Ruth, the Moabite is in the direct lineage of Jesus the Messiah. Anybody that calls in the name of the Lord will be saved. Doesn't matter what the background is. Doesn't matter what happened in the past. How about the Ammonites? They're in there too. King Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, his mother was a woman named Naamah, the Ammonite. She is the wife of Solomon. She comes in. God includes her in the genealogy as well. It doesn't matter what's gone on in the past. It doesn't matter what got lost in one generation, and that influence carries into the next and carries into the next. If anybody will call upon the name of the Lord, God in his grace will come to them and save them. The last thing is the influence of Sodom, as I've been alluding to, could be changing our lives today. It's been said We see here the possibility for believing people like us who are truly distressed by the course of this world to live lives that are so profoundly influenced by the culture that Sodom is reborn in the lives of those that we love the most. And that's what we don't want to see. What are the influences of Sodom? Well, one is materialism. We think of Lot's wife, who would, rather than go with her family and be spared of judgment, was more concerned about her material possessions. And it's not just the stuff. I mean, Abraham was like one of the richest guys around at that same time period, but he didn't really care. His life was all about his worshiping God, having a relationship with God. He was looking for a city whose builder and maker was God. The guy lived in a tent. It wasn't about the stuff. So you can have it, not be caught up in it, but certainly it's a danger. And it continues to become more and more prevalent, it seems like, as we are coming closer to the soon return of Jesus Christ. I was just reflecting on being a kid growing up in the 50s. There was no dryer. My mom hung clothes on the line. There was only one car. If she wanted the car, she drove Dad to work. A half hour there, dropped him off, and drove back. So that one day a week, she could go to the grocery store and do the banking. It was just a much simpler life. It was a much simpler life. We're pretty fast paced these days. And what we expect to have, materially, I mean, the bar just keeps getting raised up. It's amazing. Materialism, it's a concern. Pleasure seeking, the old term is heathenism. And again, as one writer said, to determine our actions by a desire for the greatest pleasure is a surrender to hell, and to bring the ways of hell on our offspring. Lot could never say no, even in a dark cave, but we must. It's like to have a good time, and I try to get out in the water, at least once a week. So as PK says, I can have my hydrotherapy, and it's important to recreate and stuff. But, there's a real drive, for pleasure and extreme things these days. It's amazing. Entertainment, tremendous influence over our lives. And, we could talk about the different studies and things that go on in the world today. It's amazing, but we can just become so immune. The people that are away from TV for a while, and I'm just talking about the typical primetime, main channels there. If you're away for a while, then you turn it on. It's pretty shocking. It's pretty shocking, the stuff that's said and shown and done, and the influence that's there is amazing. Be careful. There's some great Christian websites that will tell you what's in the movies before you go see them, so you can decide if this is a good idea or not. Great movie out right now, Courageous, written by, directed, produced by believers, the same guys that did Fireproof and Facing the Giants. Great movie about dads being committed to raising their kids and so forth. Be careful what's coming in. Brains like a computer, junk in, junk out. Immodesty. Again, it's meant to be an essential aspects of Christians. We're influenced by Sodom. Really? Yeah, actually, we're influenced by a group of gay guys that live in Paris who decide what women will wear every year. I'm not making this stuff up, right? I mean, they decide, and then they show their line for that year. My wife was a dress designer for 20 years. I know what I'm talking about. They show their line, and then that influences every designer around the Western world. So there's two warnings here. Do you really want a gay guy in Paris dictating to you how you should dress? How much cleavage you should show, and it's okay because there's somebody else that's more or less or whatever it is? And for the guys, do you want Hollywood to dictate to you what a beautiful woman looks like and acts like? Is that what you want? Or you want the Bible? I got to tell you, they're different. they're different. We're so influenced by the culture, and the immodesty is unfortunately, Sodom is in the church, and it's a tremendous influence. And maybe you're okay. Maybe you're okay, and you're going to be okay with your relationship with the Lord. But how about the next generation? Are they seeing a credibility gap? Is there a concern? That's the warning here, right? I mean, his daughters lost it. It had all happened in one generation. Jesus calls us to be a preserving influence. And in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5:13, he says there, you're the salt, speaking to believers, you're the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled by men. We're to be a preserving influence. The salt of the earth. Salt, again, is a preservative. That's how they preserved meat. If they did not get salt on it, no refrigeration, bacteria would set in, the bacteria would begin to grow, and the meat basically would rot. We could say, Jesus is saying, you're living in a rotten world. It's going to get a lot more rotten unless you're the salt of the earth. That as believers, we can have a preserving influence. And praise God for the Christians in our country that stand up for righteousness around the country. The people that love God and hold to His word. We're not like the, it's only us, everybody else just surrender their knee to Baal, kind of a thing. There's a lot of wonderful Christians around this country that are preserving this country right now. I hate to think about the United States of America post-rapture and the believers are taken out. We're a tremendous preserving influence. But we need to be careful. It is a role that we need to play. The church and the Christian world should have that preserving influence, preventing rottenness and decay from overtaking all of us. Pretty sobering stuff, huh? Lot. Who knew these 8 verses would have such relevance to us? But it's scary. Again, I hope that you look at Lot and it scares the Sodom out of you. Because for him, I think it was just a slow downward drift, not intentional. Lot never set out and thought, well, someday I hope I'm part of God's judgment where I barely escape but all my stuff is destroyed, and then I end up in a cave and commit incest with my daughters. That's what I've got kind of lined up for my life. How are you today? I don't think he did that. I kind of think that he never saw any of this coming, and it was so slow and so progressive. And again, our advantage, we have the Holy Spirit in us. We have the Word of God to instruct us. But I tell you, he would have been better off hanging onto the coattails of Father Abraham instead of running off to a place that looked good because he had been in Egypt at one time. Man, the price is high sometimes. God saves us by His grace, but we want Him to save a lot more than us, don't we? We want Him to save those around us that we love the most, that we have the influence over. But we can't do that if we model Sodom. We can only do that if we model Christ.
So light of my world. You are the